Namaste and welcome to Shri Raghava Krishna ji. He is the co-founder of Brihat. It's such a pleasure to have you with us today, Raghava ji.
It's a pleasure to be here, Aparnaji. Thank you so much for having me. This is like home turf. I've been always learning from the sidelines, so it does feel a little, odd to be here as the audience,
Yeah.
because I was always watching.
Let us just see it as as a discussion that or a chance to chat with each other, which we
Of
haven't
course,
had for
yes,
ever, I think.
yes.
Yeah.
No, look forward to that.
Yeah, I was, yesterday in a music session. I'm passionate about music, and one of the gurus was saying that, some kritis when they are sung, there are two talas. There are option of, the beat being you can choose between two beats. But Sampradaya always has gone with the one that sounds better. So, we don't have to actually we may be confused that there are two options,
Yeah,
but we just need to follow Sampradaya because it will tell us at some point when the song is sung, they have always chosen the one that sounds better.
yeah, yeah.
So, in
It's
your
so
journey
powerful.
with yeah, Brihat, have you had to make choices like this where you have a doubt as to what is the current correct path or the correct direction that you need to take? But always there's something in our sampradaya that aesthetically or intuitively tells you that what has to be done.
Oh, this is brilliant. Thank you so much for this. You know, we understand this today as the paradox of choice because neuroscience tells us that we are not really wired, and this is common experience for all of us. Just to bring it home, uh, this must be a common experience to many people out there, including myself. That finally, when you do get some time to watch something, and you turn your OTT or Netflix or Amazon, and you browse through the catalog, you would often notice that you spend about 30 minutes going to the catalog and then get tired. There's a bit of fatigue. You say that, okay, I've done my browsing, and you shut it off and go back to what you're doing. And contrast that with the days when we were growing up, and you probably had we were the transition generation, right? Because we went from the analog to the digital, and through that, we were also the post-liberalization generation. We went from just DD to about 5 channels or 6 channels, and it was far more easier to make a choice and to actually reach the destination that you have of having a good experience and experiencing contentment. So there is a paradoxical and a relationship of inversion between expansion of choice and contentment. And the problem is that we, in the idea of freedom today and freedom to, not freedom from, we sometimes confound and we actually conflate increase in options with contentment. And this is something that even as leaders we experience every day. It's not just one decision. It's not just the big decisions. Of course, there are many big decisions where you are guided by tradition, you're guided by wisdom, but it's also the micro interactions on everyday basis. Right? When to intervene, how to intervene, what to say, how much to say. All of these are acts of self-awareness that a leader has to bring in on a day-to-day basis. There are the big moments, of course, to your question of how I was guided and what are those moments. Right at the beginning itself, when we started Brihat in 2021, Aparnaji, uh, I wouldn't venture too much into the circumstance, but I had already assembled a team, right? And you can imagine it's not easy to assemble a team. And I've always been somebody who built teams first, and then with the team you get to the product and the vision and all that. And a lot of this was built on reputation and goodwill, and people wanting to be associated with you. And in some of these cases, people had by then quit. We were just about to announce this. We had had the initial conversations, and they moved. In some cases, they moved states. In one case, somebody had moved a nation to be with us in Hyderabad. So people had already quit. And what I thought was secure in terms of funding or in terms of some other arrangements did not come through. Right? And therefore, this challenge of what to do then. One is, if you read a lot of literature, we end up in the modern context post rationalizing whatever we witness as success and imagine that that's how it is. But if you look at tradition and if you look at the idea of Dharma, it's very clear that transparency and the ability to lead by showing accountability is what Dharma tells you. So I had two choices. One, you could obfuscate that and say that okay, we are and try and solve this. A lot of in the startup culture today, this happens quite a bit, right? You try and go from one paycheck to another paycheck without taking your team into confidence, and that is why you have this this whole cycle of people expanding too fast and then contracting faster, and we justify that as a economic phenomena. We say it's boom and bust, but the whole idea of leadership is to make sure that there is no boom and bust, which is not sustainable. Now we think of dharma as esoteric, but dharma, if you look at it in a day-to-day context, is to truly understand what behaviors sustain. So at that point, I had this choice whether I can take into confidence people who've never worked with me. If at least those are people that I've worked with for a long time and they know that there is a potential. They had come together because they thought it was promising. There was some goodwill and there was a reputational cost associated with it. But if I didn't open up, if I didn't tell them that this is what happened, then I wouldn't have been able to get the kind of respect that endures. Inspiration can be momentary, but respect is the one that secures inspiration for a longer period. So I had a conversation right at that time with them, and I told them that I'm putting my personal stake into this because whatever was was supposed to be the overall environment did not work out, and I can take, and I was willing to. And this is also the spirit of yajna that you understand from civilization. These ideas feel so otherworldly till you actually bring them into your life. Right? Yajna begins with what are you putting into it, right? And I had just the choice: should I abandon this now, ask for forgiveness, and cut my losses, and ask people to move back to wherever they were, or should I take everyone into confidence, back myself, put whatever I have at stake because I'm saying that this idea is precious to me? Should I put my stake into it and say that I will prioritize your interests over everything else, and I will secure this for as long as I can, and I will be always accountable and transparent to you? And just guided by tradition, and this is where gurus and just the ability to listen to them sincerely helps. The only advice that I got was you pray to Durga Ma and do what you're planning to do, right? And you consider everything that you get after this also as an offering back to her. So this idea that we keep hearing in tradition, that it is flowing through me, that you are not the author, there is no doership. All of these, they sound archaic, but if you truly act on it in a moment of, criticality in your life, you will see how powerful they are. They are not ideas; they are truth. They are not abstractions of the intellect. They are actually the ontological core of this civilization. So there have been many, many occasions like that where just listening to the guru's wisdom, understanding the idea of yajna and what it means in an organization, understanding dharma as sustainability. And sustainability includes every leader, every single day, Aparnaji, I can tell you this. We are all trading in every single interaction on a stock exchange of trust, and this is happening dynamically in every interaction. Right? A stand-up meeting that we have, to a conversation that somebody wants to have with you, are you truly available then? Are you truly listening? Have you truly prioritized listening to them over imposing your ideas on them? These are small little micro exchanges that build your trust and equity on a daily basis. And to me, leadership is the act of summoning the right reflex on a micro level. Right? And this is what I get from tradition, because when we talk about yoga chitta vritti nirodha as a idea, and if you look at it on a daily basis in your work, you have to question what are your vrittis, and are you actually mindful of that when somebody is approaching. So in a million myriad ways, I experience this every day, from the big starting block to the daily interactions.
Wonderful. I have a list of questions, Rakvaj, because the meta retreat which you attended was based on nationalism.
Yeah,
So, if with your permission, I'll just go through
yeah,
this
yeah.
list one by one. Yeah, the current situation in which we are today is such that we have multiple crises coming together at the same time. That's what you have also said. And one of the units of analysis out of, you talk about the 6 units of analysis, and one of the main units is the nation state. So you say that we have to use all 6 units of analysis. So what are these 6 units that you are referring to? Could you just explain to the audience?
Oh, great. I'm glad somebody is actually going through that. So it's a It's in many ways it's a reflection of how I have tried to piece these things together, because far too often our opinions are grounded by what's available and what's visible, right? But if you were to, like you mentioned, multi-crisis, and this is a whole body of literature, that some intellectual explorers from the West have started putting together on the systemic analysis of what is going wrong, right? There is the event horizon, which is visible to all of us. Then there is the underlying factors. At a first level, you can say this is the political system, this is democracy, this is economic system. Underlying that is history. The political system emerged out of a certain context, right? You get to history. Underlying that is metaphysics, right? The theory of self, the theory of individual. So you unpack these things and develop a habit of mind to look at the systemic roots of what is the visible phenomenon, right? And it is through this journey I've realized that, in my understanding, there is a confluence of three phenomena, and which has to be analyzed at six levels for us to understand, or at least have the right to opine about the state of affairs in the world today. Firstly, I'll go to the phenomena because that's important to understand as the psychological backdrop, and then, of course, how do we analyze that? The first one is, we're all, including who we consider to be cultural and traditional, because Prakriti is always more powerful. And the influence that nature has on you, despite your awareness, despite your fight, environment matters a lot.
Yeah.
And we are in a one life environment. If we were to sum up the entire global cultural attitude today, it is that we live as if we live only once, and therefore we also morally sanction taking things away from future that do not belong to us. And what we call a civilization is essentially what the ancestors have left for us to inherit. And the challenge today we have is because of a neoliberal or a liberal atheistic culture, which denies the idea of punarjanma and therefore karma. You still have the fundamental challenge of what is a good life then. If you have a multi-life metaphysics, a good life is something that will actually make sure that you have a progression from one life to another. Evolution happens over time, because that has been taken away from your cognitive loop itself. Now you're left with this question of what is the way to maximize happiness in this life, because it's finite. The natural answer to that, by definition, by extension, by design, will be consuming. I want to consume as many experiences as I can. I want to consume as much material as I can, because it's a play of senses, right? So, what the neoliberal world order has done, what the atheistic worldview has done, is take away the sacred. And by taking away the sacred and punarjanma and karma, it has taken away the responsibility that you have. And it has replaced responsibility with a sanction for indulgence. And that leads to also an economic system. The second dimension to this is the economic system, which is entirely based on extraction of materials. Now we've used technology, we've optimized supply chain, we've used the global capital allocation, all of this to hasten our ability to extract. So, and nature needs time to replenish. That's what we understand as dharma. That is why, if you look at tradition, it says these 3 months you should not eat this. It's not just another idea, it's the idea for nature to replenish. Right? We understand that in the Hindu culture today. Those norms have been broken away. And all the negative externalities of extraction. Like, for example, if let's say, you get an iPhone every 6 months, but iPhone has a lot of materials that go into making it. Right? You got lead, you got chromium, whatever materials it has. They have to be extracted from earth, and they have to be extracted from the areas which have those resources. So you have a whole geopolitical situation that's organized and serving this economy, which is extractive, and the negative externalities of that. Because when you extract it at that rate, you spoil the entire ecological zone there. You spoil the socio-political dynamics of that land. You actually change the democratic atmosphere there to suit your needs. All of these interventions actually affect well-being there. And those externalities are not reflecting on the balance sheets of these organizations. There is, in any balance sheet that you look at, and if you look at assets and liabilities, the negative externality is not factored. So you have your revenues, you have your costs, and revenues minus costs is your profit. But there is an ecological cost, there is a social cost, there is a cultural cost that you're imposing, which is not computed here. So it's actually an accounting issue. And therefore, we are not able to look at the damage we are causing and we're imagining the benefit that we're producing in the name of GDP. This is a challenge. Now, this was also okay if our fundamental desired production was not hijacked. You and I, we've grown up in a certain cultural milieu. If you go back and reflect on where did you get your ideas of yourself from? Now, why do you wear what you wear? Why do you speak the way you do? All of that, we mimic a certain culture. Every person learns desire by mimicking what they see as aspirational. Right? You see a certain singer, you see a certain actor, you see a certain brand, and you try and mimic it. Most part of human history, this mimicking process was within a radius of 25 to 50 kilometers. We did not have, and globalization, therefore, and SN Baluji talks about this, is not just the export of labor and capital, it's also the export of conflict. The conflict that we are having today in our homes is not our conflict. We've imported some other conflict in the idea of freedom, in the idea of equality, as they're framed there. So when the cultural export happens and it is imposed on alien culture, you're also importing all the conflicts because you don't have the critical reserve to examine it. So our desire locus itself has changed from our physical material reality to a digital reality. And digital production does not have any transaction cost. So if, for example, if you want to make a table and if you want to make another table, you need to procure the wood, which means that you have to wait for the tree to grow and then cut it. And it's only possible. There's a natural limit to it. But in digital technology, if I make an asset, a WhatsApp video or whatever, for me to send it to 100 people or 500 people is the same cost. In fact, the cost comes down as it scales up. That is the advantage of a digital economy. Therefore, your cognitive loop of additional costs is taken away. You think that there is infinite rate and therefore infinite desires. So when these desires are infinite, your senses are hijacked. We have a situation where our desires are on steroids and our senses are on a ventilator by design. And this is the challenge that I talk about. If you want to look at the global cultural phenomena, you need to understand the economic system, you need to understand the desired production system, you need to understand the exponential technology, and you need to understand obviously history, cultural context, and all of that. The last part, which is sort of compromising and even compounding all of this, is also this idea that there is free debt. Look at the corporate structure today. Most of the business models are just last man standing business models. You scale up by investing so much to outbid your competitors. Right? You once you secure a position, you put in so much money that you get a monopolizing power over it. That's how, if you look at the battle between Amazon and Parega India in the Indian context, they can offer such destructive discounts or other offers simply because they have the pole position, and they strengthen that pole position by outpaying and outbidding everybody else. And that also means that they become the sole arbiter for your knowledge and for the way you access your knowledge. And this idea of free debt has also seeped into the individual. So I have no moral limit on indulgence. I have no limit on how desires are produced and multiplied. And I have no idea of a material limit for me to fulfill that desire. So this entire thing combined is leading to stress. Stress and anxiety and well-being. And all of this we hear from the Western ideas today, and we don't understand how the mind works. Mind will multiply whatever you supply to it. If you're supplying the idea of trauma, despair, it will multiply that. Right? This is what yoga tells us. Now, what is happening here is this hijacking of senses now means that the difference or the chasm between what I see, what I want as my desire, and what I can do is increasing all the time. So there is no contentment. There is no moment for me to experience gratitude. And there is no way that I can wonder. Right? I mean, what you began the interview with when you went to the concert and when you listened to that, it sparked off an entire stream of thought. And that is wonder. Right? When you have two choices, you're wondering. Right? This aspect of wonder itself has been taken away from us. So that's the fundamental basis. Now, how do you analyze this? How do you understand this? You look at it from an individual perspective, individual in terms of moral sanction and how desires are formed. You look at it as what is the incentive for technology, because all of us are learning culture from technology today. Why is a Facebook or a Meta or an X the way it is? Because one, the business model is attention economy based. What is being commoditized is your attention. You're not paying for Twitter. You're not paying for Facebook. You're the commodity. And there's a thrill of a million people suddenly, coming onto your platform. for any creator, especially in the Western paradigm, it's a great thrill, and
Yeah.
and that creatorship is very powerful. It's very seductive. Then you look at
Hmm.
media, right? Media's business model is also conflict. Media sells today based on conflict. It does not sell anything on harmony. Then you look at
Hmm.
academia. In academia, the academic ego is that the theory that I am supplying is able to consume so many people. So it's not necessarily money, but there is a ego of the intellect there which is operating. So you have these four levels of big tech, big media, individual, and academia, which is then sort of captured by the nation state. And nation state and public policy today is basically nothing but a foreign policy tool. Culture, and Jaishankarji writes about this, and it's important to understand this. Most of the global conflict, up until even 10, 15 years ago, was conventional in the sense of hard power. What is your military strength? What is your technological strength? What is your economic strength? What is your comprehensive national power? Last 10, 15 years, and not enough people pay attention to this, the conflict has entered everyday culture. Look at US today, the most powerful nation, 60K per capita, right? And yet it swings like a pendulum. 10 years ago, it said wokeism, equality, gender rights, and all of this. 10 years hence, it is dismantling that entire edifice. 10 years ago, it said war on, 5 years ago, it said war on planet, vaccinate the planet, there is only one virus. Today, they are saying all of that was a hoax. They can still play this game simply because they are powerful. They can play this game and say that this is a US issue. Well, it's not a US issue. In your oscillation, you have imposed so much of violence on the world. We have vaccinated our children. We have experienced the COVID deaths because you sanctioned a research that is unethical, right? And you having gone fully into this wokeism, DEI and ESG kind of framework, you have imposed it on us as policy. Today, Rajiv Malhotraji's book has come out and he's talking about it. Our education is teaching this to our kids because we have to mimic what is successful. And through the corporate structure, the corporate is the other vector, the sixth vector, nation states extension. A DEI policy, whether you like it or not as an Indian, is imposed on you simply because you're working there. So this is how we have to analyze these things. Like what is happening at the individual level? Why are individuals subscribing to this? Why is media supporting this? Why is technology and the products? What is the creators? Why are the artists doing it? Why are the artists all leftist? Why do they like that? It's a question that troubles
Yeah.
us. What is
Yeah.
and it's so beautiful. Tradition is so beautiful. Why are you not representing it? It's because the incentive system is layered against it, and that's global. Right? So that's basically. I'm saying that we'll have to increase our complexity of understanding this.
Yeah. Thank you. Um, the question of civilizational identity and heritage, and you talk of it as a kind of a cradle which we have to fall back on, and now also you are referring to it. So, how best can we use the nation state to further national knowledge systems, and in our case, Indian knowledge systems?
I look at Indian knowledge systems at three levels. In a global civilization, you have to have an answer for the what you call the multi-crisis, right? Ecology, immigration, war, poverty, loneliness. All of these are seen as different crises, but the whole paradigm of multi-crisis is that this is just one crisis which is manifesting in different forms, right? And that crisis is sense making. That crisis is the void, and there Indian knowledge systems has the not just the theory and the content and the corpus, but also the practical ritual experience, the collective experience of doing it. So we have to position Indian knowledge systems not as and it's not just about positioning. The truth is that it's not about I mean, knowledge or ecology does not recognize a visa. Consciousness does not need permission to
Yeah.
transfer, right? So this is the fundamental truth, and we have to say that the global civilization having brought us to this precipice where the crisis has gone internal and therefore is manifesting in the ecological, we have to have a different way of attaining joy. And this is a question. The way I frame this question is, you have stoked this desire. You have given this idea that 8 billion, 10 billion people can have a great life. Now that's not a problem because everybody agree. Now, but you have defined this good life as pursuit of material wealth, a pursuit of artha and kama in the context of purushartha, right? Now, how can we decouple the idea of a good life from pure artha and kama? That is the basic global question that we'll need to answer. which means that you'll need the metaphysics of Dharma. That's why I say that this civilization is a cradle, because it is Dharma. And this answer has been given, and Sri Aurobindo has done it when he revolutionized Indian politics. He talks about it, and I'll quote him. But this is the first challenge, that you need to say that this is a global knowledge system. And if you don't have this, look at what happened with COVID. The the distance between recognition, in fact, creation of a problem, we leave it at that because the research itself was unethical. But assume that the research somehow happened and you suddenly had a virus. The distance between recognition of a problem and to imposing a global one size fits all solution was so short. And why is that? Because you have only one episteme. You've only considered one way of knowing as the final act of knowing. It's political, it's power, because you want to impose it. But imagine if there was a global table of knowledge systems where we all pool in and say this phenomena from our perspective looks like this. And if we were able to give the yogic, Ayurvedic, Panchamahabhuta perspective on that, it would have had a certain kind of well-being quotient for the entire world. We wouldn't have had to import all of this, violence that we've done. Right? So that's one thing. Now, we also have to look at IKS in the terms of nation state, because whether we like it or not, the highest entity that we have today is a nation state. Beyond India, if you have to travel, the geopolitical entity, you need a visa, a passport, and all of that. Right? While we can think of humanity, the way it exists today is nation state. There are a lot of thinkers who say that this will not sustain. We will need to move into a bioregional paradigm, and I think that will happen, and that will be dharmic. But as it exists today, the challenge notwithstanding, it is the nation state. Now, within nation state, you look at the risks that India has. Look at Kerala, look at West Bengal, look at Punjab, look at, of course, Kashmir. Right? Look at, in many ways, the kind of debate that we're seeing with NEP and Tamil Nadu today. Right? There are a lot of challenges where there's a lot of play on subnationalism, where foreign powers are directly able to engage and influence with state level, state with smallest state, individual states, the leadership, and they can give them incentives which are anti-national, anti-national integrity. Right? You need, therefore, and this is a problem of knowledge, because we haven't told how, or we haven't told it effectively, the story of how the Sikh tradition had a memory of 900 years to reclaim what was theirs. And they fought that battle in the rubric of Dharma. They didn't fight honor any other thing. All the lineage, they were talking about Rama and Krishna. Now, because the story has not been told powerfully, because this knowledge system is not there, that is flowing through education, that's flowing through music, that's flowing through art, because there is no one civilizational anchor to actually look at all your cultural conduits. What is happening is it is very easy for any other alien system with purely economic incentive to unplug it. This is the challenge that we see with the Khalistan movement. Right? That there is, unfortunately, and it belies all common sense, that you think that there is a separatist movement bang in the middle of India and Pakistan. How will it ever survive? Right? But fact is that there are enough people who seem to believe that that exists, and that has an influence on international relations between India and Canada. Look at this. I mean, this is a very, very important thing to for people, also for all of us to reflect on, that all of the world order was governed by these ideas that if we have cultural exchange, if we have economic exchange, if we have democracy, if we have human rights, then the relationships between nation states can endure. That was the compact, right, for the last 50, 60 years. All it took was one corrupt politician in Justin Trudeau and one segment of your base, your demography, which is aligning with him, to spoil the investment that India and Canada have made between each other as nation states for the last 50 years. Our relationship in the last 1 year has broken down completely, simply because there was a political need for Trudeau to co-opt a separatist movement. Right? And if Trump did not get elected, that would have gotten worse. So that is why we need to have this knowledge system as a civilizational anchor. If you don't supply this memory constantly through all streams, that we are one civilization, this is the cradle, and this land, the sacred geography, is not just a religious, esoteric, spiritual idea. It's a fundamental nation state idea, which is why Sri Aurobindo said this is Bhavani Bharati as Bharati itself, as Bharatma itself. Right? And he gave us, he tells it so clearly when he revolutionized Indian politics. He says it is not the politics that we play. It's not for politics alone. It is not theology. It is not philosophy. It is not religion. It is not socio-cultural questions. It is all of this, but from the lens of dharma. It is dharma that is our politics. So if we make all of our politics and sacralize it as dharma, then the national integrity is an outcome of that. Then you don't want to separate, right? Because you have identity established. And this is the challenge for all civilizations all time, Aparnaji. Identity, stability, and prosperity. The question of who we are, the question of how do we come together, especially Bharat, with so much diversity, and the question of how do we come together towards something prosperous. This has been resolved in this civilization. That's why I call it a cradle. And I think IKS is once again the means to anchor to that cradle.
Thank you. You also say that human behavior is the root of crisis. What do you mean by that? And you use phrases like redemption and maps of meaning, which are cornerstones of another author, Jordan Peterson's discourse. So, have you been influenced by him? And
No,
what
no, I'm not
exactly?
influenced. No, Jordan Peterson is an interesting thinker, or at least was a few years ago before he went completely. So maps of meaning, I look at, in fact, the first usage of, I look at it as cognitive maps. Right? It's not Jordan Peterson, but I learned it from Pratap Banu Mehta. Right? The one thing that I learned from PBM is he talks about the cognitive maps of Indian citizens' relationship with the state, right? And it has a certain he looks at, for example, says that there are three phases in which Indians have connected to the state. Right after independence, it was seen as a partner and a collaborator with the feudal lords, the landed case. When the transition happened into the socialist economy and industry and the license raj, Indian state was seen as an enabler of the industrialist, the license raj. And post liberalization, it is seen as the enabler of markets. He says that these are the only three cognitive maps that Indians have about their state, which, I mean, there's a certain way of looking at it, but it's a useful framework to analyze. Right? So, why is the individual at the center of it? And this is not just me, it's more than Jordan Peterson. I look at the work that Francis Fukuyama has done. Fukuyama is rightly derided for his end of history comment, right? Because 1990, what he meant, and I think it's important also to understand what he meant. Right? Obviously, he was not saying that history will end. What he was saying when Cold War ended and the Berlin Wall collapsed, when he made that statement and that observation, is that the contest between the two big ideas of the world following World War II. One was the US-led capitalistic, expansionist thing, and the other one was communist. One. He said that the contest has ended with that. There's only one idea that we have which will prevail for all times to come, and therefore end of history. And what is that idea? That idea is liberal democracy. And liberal democracy as free markets, human rights, and adult franchise, universal adult franchise, democratic institutions, institutions of accountability. They've poured in so much, and it is intellectual labor. We must respect it. There's a journey that UK has gone through from Magna Carta to democracy. So they look at their institutional evolution very critically, but also with a lot of pride. And we can understand why he was saying that. He was derided because he was proven wrong. It didn't even take 2 decades, 3 decades for him to be totally wrong, right? US with its arrogance, what the danger of an intellectual when he gets it wrong, when he's influential, is that these ideas become doctrines. And this idea of end of history, liberal democracy as the only way became a killer app that US exported to the entire world. There was only one way to measure everyone. The real colonization that happens in this is that not only do they do it, even we frame our development in that language. If you have to talk about your progress, you have to say this is our human rights index. You have to say this is our free market index. You have to say this is our ESG index. So they create the instruments through which you measure yourself. So at all points, you're dressing up like a school kid to present yourself and be validated. And when you get that validation, you feel good. You come back and say that we are now number 30 from number 50. That does not mean a thing when the idea itself is wrong. And look at China, how well China dealt with it. They put their heads down for 3 decades. They didn't play the democracy or whatever. They didn't take the Western idea in full. This one, they put their heads down and they use their enterprise to export to US. And US, because this is what happens when there is hubris, you actually lose your core competence. In 3 decades, US by volition dismantled all of its core competencies by outsourcing all of this to China and helping China grow. It has never happened in the history of civilizations that the lone superpower actually funds and enables its competitor in 30 years. And that is the moment we are in today. Whatever we will experience will be a play between US and China on what happens there. Right? So within this, the individual choices, unfortunately, because they are two opposing paradigms. The US paradigm is sovereign individual and the state as a protector of individual freedom. So uninhibited, unbridled freedom and liberty as the gospel. And on the other side, you have China, which is surveillance state. So you have sovereign individual and a surveillance state. These are the two models that are governing the individual choice today. That either I think of myself because they control the education, they control geopolitics. So either I think of myself, our kids are doing this.
Yeah.
They think of themselves as radical free, atomistic individuals because that's coming from a powerful global establishment. Or the other paradigm is that the state is all powerful and the state can surveil and guide all of your behavior. The Dharma way, the India way, and why India should rise and why India will rise is it is the middle path, which does not restrict individual freedom. It gives you individual freedom with individual duty and responsibility through the metaphysics of karma. And it does not say that state can encroach, nor does it say that state does not have any role. State has a role. It's not just public good. State is also the shaper of culture. It has that role. But culture guided by dharma. That's why you had Chaturvarna. That's why you had Sengol, which is guiding the king. Right? So this idea of Sengol, which keeps the state in check but also secures the individual freedom, is the idea of the individual liberty, freedom, expanse that we need to take to the world. And that is where I feel that all of these nation state construct and how the individual is relating to that is important. Interestingly, Fukuyama, after his end of history work, 20 years later or 15 years later, he wrote a book called Identity. And in that, it is Fukuyama who talks about what I'm saying, in terms that you need a new idea of
Right.
self, because my idea that I gave 15 years ago is not working. The advantage of a Western intellectual is that the costs of your ideas are not yours. You can always come up with another idea, right? But we have to bear it.
Yeah. Thank you. So you also talk about like now about dharma drishti to solve civilizational policy making.
Yeah.
So, what is the macro leap of dharma that you are referring to? And dharma drishti is about critical thinking. So, when we talk about shastriya for sangeet, for instance, I would say that I can say that it's only music, or I can say that it is the most important thing in the world. You can have two very different ideas and hold it together in your head. So,
Yeah.
what are you referring to when you talk about critical thinking in dharma drishti?
Okay. I look at my understanding. My purge fundamentally is sustainability and therefore ecology. I
Yeah.
look at your music can flourish when the planet is there, when you have good quality food, when you have when in terms of systems and maps and all of that. So you have the individual flourishing. Let's say there is the artistic, then there is the religious, this one, then there is the economic, the social. All of these are layers into which we expand. And civilization, like I say, is the air cover or the cradle, whichever way you look at it. In which this is, if you were to look at Panchamahabhuta, civilization is like the Akasha. It is the void in which all of the cultural, artistic, economic, social can play out. But it is the Aadhar, right? It is like that, this one. So the question of what Dharmadrishti means in public policy is to understand what is the optimal point between uh, poverty, for example, on one side, not having enough resources, not having an aspiration for life because of lack of resources, versus excess, versus something that is borrowing from future. Somewhere in the middle is dharma. Dharma does not say that this is your extent and condition forever. Dharma will definitely also not say that there is infinite growth and infinite material extraction that's possible, right? So my purge, and I think this is applicable to everything. It can be applicable even to music, right? What is the right way of sustaining anything? So the thinking that I'm hoping to foster through our programs and what we are trying to do is to approach everything from this macro perspective of what is the threshold limit. What is the threshold limit for your own ambition? What is the threshold limit for your extraction of materials from nature? What is the threshold limit for your idea of one world? How do you calibrate? So I want to, for me, there's a difference between the Western critical thinking and what we call Dharma Drishti. That's why, you use this to make sure that people understand and you're able to relay, but you're also always trying to fold that into this because this is the bigger thing, right? Critical thinking is, it comes to you from the Western liberal arts paradigm, where they talk to you about critical reasoning, inquiry, and all of that. But they don't have a fundamental ontology of the self. They don't have your yoga chitta vritti nirodha to tell you that your ability to inquire itself is a function of your samskaras. They don't have Ayurveda to tell you that your ahara, vihara, vichara, vyavahara is the basis for everything else. They cannot establish the link between your social, your food choices, your psychological thinking, what you listen to, and your ability to reason. They think that reason can happen independently. And this is a paradox, and we should look at it critically. And we don't ask these questions of the West, which is what I love doing. Is how are you claiming to be a culture and a civilization of critical inquiry after having demonstrated your critical inquiry like a pendulum in the last 10 years? Forget that. But 60% of your society is going through divorce. There is a open counter, across the counter opioid crisis of about 80-85% people, right, who are taking that. Can a drunk man be capable of excising reason? Can a drugged society claim to be critically thinking? These questions we don't ask because we don't look back enough, right? So what is it that a 60K per capita state, what is the human experience? What is the individual experience? What is the void which makes a 60K per capita country go meaningless? How can that be? It tells you something fundamental about humans. It tells you that any indexation on one dimension of life, in this case, the material dimension of life, if you take it to the extreme, it will become unsustainable. That generates the vikritis which will destroy culture, which is why Sri Aurobindo talks about integral yoga. Right? And look at, and that is where in this culture, and you know this better than I do, but if you look at it from a integral yoga perspective, you have three fundamental impulses as a human. Your first impulse is to love, is to actually experience love and to love. Right? This civilization has taken it to its maximum and made it the transcendental principle of Bhakti Yoga. The next fundamental impulse is to know. We are creatures of knowledge. We want to know. Right? Once again, we've taken it to the maximum and said Jnana Yoga. What is the highest thing that you can know? Know yourself. The third thing is to do. We want to do. We want to create. We want, and it took it to the highest experience and said Karma Yoga. Do it selflessly. So this civilization knows how to translate our innate needs into something that is sustainable. So that is Dharma Drishti. How do we, today in government, we are talking about Karma Yogi. There's a whole mission that has been established, right? So these ideas have to go. And when we say Dharma Drishti, I'm looking at, for example, Kumbh today. People have to go. That is the collective experience that we want the Hindu religious experience to be, shared by many. But what is the threshold beyond which it can fall into some kind of fear? What are the right emotions that it can generate? How can it be gratitude and wonder and not fear and guilt? Because fear and guilt are the colonial tools, right? Shame is a colonial tool. So this balance between the higher qualities and the shadripus is what I call Dharma Drishti. And my belief, and I'm reading literature even from the West, they don't have this vocabulary, but they are able to experience this void in their own culture, even in policy making. So I think there's a rich dialogue that needs to happen between the Indian knowledge systems and our idea of Dharma Drishti, with the ideas of thresholds and allocations, sustainability that's coming from the West. And I like Nagraj sir, what he talks about, that there has to be a intersection through a means of common sense. A first principle, it need not be antagonistic. You need not fight all the time against anthropology and sociology. You need to figure out what are the common first principles. Linguistics is a discipline. You need to respect it. Now, how do we make sure that it is applied for dharma and not for suppression, not for Dravidian Aryan suppression? Right? So that's what I mean by Dharma Drishti.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's going to be the key component when we are trying to transmit this to the next generation language. So, I'll just go on to the last question. How do we talk about all this to youngsters? So, if you talk about culture, they go off in a tangent. And if you say dharma, they equate it with religion. If you say tradition, they hear oppression. So, we are living in a world where everything is hijacked by, what you call liberal ideology, and which is a performative and self-congratulatory culture, you call it. So, how do we transmit this? Of course, common sense is probably the most ideal way to which they would be receptive.
Yeah.
But are there any ways which through Brihat you have been able to, you go to schools, you have so many outreach programs. What is your strategy in promoting all?
No, I think a fundamental truth of our times that we should respect is people listen to you if they like what they see. And I'm not
Hmm.
just talking about vanity and optics, but there's a certain aesthetic. And that aesthetic, and you have to be tuned into, and you need to learn. And you need to
Hmm.
truly learn by listening. And that's where, when we talk, because we began with leadership, fundamental wisdom and humility is to actually become absent in that context, and so right. So that they like it. If they like you, they listen to you, and for them to like you, it's very important that we don't take a pulpit on any of this. Right? There is no sermonizing that's going to work in this generation, and we must be comfortable with it, right? Because
Yeah.
you and I, if you have to go to a temple, we'll just go silently three times, take prasada and go
Hmm.
back. They will question, right?
Hmm.
That's the, and we also have to take responsibility that it is us who created this. I start from that perspective, that whether I had the ability to make a different choice does not matter. But the truth is that in the fuzz and in the warmth of liberalization that swept all of us from 1991, we're slightly more prosperous today than what our previous generation was, because of the markets opening up and whatever happened. But we did not have the ability to look at the cultural cost of economic growth. And maybe that's natural. Maybe economic growth happens and then it creates the affordance for questions of culture, which we are at today. So our opportunity today is to reorient this towards culture, but it's going to happen only when you respect the moral imagination and aspiration in the young. You have to acknowledge and you have to recognize that whatever way, however they're saying it, the aesthetic of how they say it might not be appealing to our aesthetic or somebody else's aesthetic. That doesn't matter. But the fact is, it comes from a moral core. They are a lot more caring generation. They appear careless because it's a facade. They don't want to be hurt. They don't want to be vulnerable, because we've actually bought into their consciousness the fragility of a civilization. We did not have this question when we were growing up in terms of, will the planet survive, what happens to culture. We were not, I keep saying this, at 21, 23, 25, the success model for me was very clear. You get into a job, you try and become stable in life, you marry, you buy a house. That was the model of success, and we chased that. And in chasing that, we've given some financial anchor to the next generation, but we are not able to carry our culture. But on that generation now, we are imposing this idea of at 21, 23, that there is a civilization. You have to, there's this fight that they've been recruited into,
Yeah.
right? And we must empathize with it, what it does to a young person's mind when the challenges, particularly in the AI world today, Aparnaji, we've got to recognize this challenge. We are going to see a massive culling of jobs. I, I keep saying this, and I'm not saying this because I want to sound good. I am a very, very moderately talented person who just happened to be in the job market at the right time in 2001. Nothing extraordinary, because I did not even have any idea of the world beyond just trying to get into a job from a very modest upbringing that I had. And I'm not, it's not an excuse, but that's the truth, right? Because there was a rising tide in call centers, in IT, in BPO, and because I was able to get into something as a MNC at that time, and I had an opportunity to interact with people from other cultures at that time, and you grew, and luck also meant that I got into a creative industry, which gave me another opportunity and all of that. But I have to recognize that that opportunity is not there for the young person today. There are a lot of challenges, and the entry level jobs are going to be very, very difficult. An economic survey talks about it. Our policy making is now cognizant of this. So we have to be empathetic. We've introduced all these battles into their mind through social media and through all of this, and that's natural. You can't. That's how we've claimed our civilization back. Also, that's the paradox. It is through social media that we've come into contact. That is how we've recognized a society, a community, and all of that. But the flip side of that is that we've recruited a lot more people into the battle before their base settlement is done. And therefore, you need to be, when you interact with them, you need to be empathetic. You need to also listen, and you need to truly respect that they have a moral imagination. That's my value system when I interact with them. Second, of course, you have to talk to them both at the intellectual and emotional level. If you only talk emotional level, you will lose out the top 10, 15 percentile who are the influencers who can actually make the difference. Now, if you only talk intellect, you have a huge void in the middle who want to know by experiencing, right? Which is where I feel the storytelling, the first part of our work at Brihat, it was Hariji who, in fact, gave it that coinage of cultural storytelling when I first discussed the idea with him. And that is the direction for that is our young people should be able to feel that for every problem that they experience in life, the solution can come from your own cultural milieu. Is it an issue with love? Is it an issue with anxiety? Is it a issue with job? Is it financial stress? There are enough and more stories in your Itihasa Purana corpus which can actually be the way for you to remake. That's what I mean by redemption, not in the sin being redeemed by Christ's sense. This redemption is by recognizing that you belong to a culture that does not let you fall and hit the ground hard. Sri Rama and Hanuma, when they were having a conversation, that whole episode of how Rama notices Hanuma, how does he stand, how does he speak, what is the greatness that is hidden behind the facade. That is such a powerful story for the emotional kind of turmoil that young people are here today, right? Because suddenly you have to express yourself on all these public platforms, but you've not been given the means. So it's like a Hanuma without a Rama. You have this self-doubt, you have all of this, but there is no mentoring for you to express it the right way, something that allows you to flourish. So our role, I think, has to be very gently, and my team, Amrit, who heads our organization now, he has a very good metaphor. He says it's the potter's hand, right? Which is, which holds it from the inside, but also knocks it from the outside to bring it into a shape. So that holding inside, by getting that confidence, by showing that you are also vulnerable, by being comfortable in expressing that vulnerability, by not talking about it from a pulpit, by talking about it aesthetically. These are competencies and behaviors that anybody who is claiming to be an Indic leader needs to cultivate. And I think that needs a program in itself. And the whole Indic leadership program needs to happen.
Thank you so much, Raghavaji. I think on this note, where we know we don't isolate youngsters in a us versus them paradigm, I think that is the key to continuity of this rich tradition,
It is.
where
It is.
together we work on something, and of course the concept of purva janma and future
Yes.
births, the cycle has to keep. That will probably inculcate a certain responsibility in all of us.
It does. It absolutely does. And they will do wonders because once they are convinced, they have the best creative means that we never had. The advantage that they have is that there is a lot more financial resource, there's a lot more networking resource, and there's a lot more creative resource available to them, tell the story in a much more powerful way. And I think that's our responsibility to help them tell that story of our civilization.
Thank you so much for such a lovely and engaging conversation. I hope we do get another opportunity to continue this, maybe on some other areas which I was not able to cover
No,
because
I
of the
hope so
focus
too.
on nationalism. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope so too. Absolutely. Definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
having me, Aparnaji. It's a
Yeah.
delight to always be in touch with you. Thank
Same here. Absolutely. Namaste.
you.